Thank you, Dr. Kamakshi, for giving me this opportunity to talk about one of my favorite topics, that is perioperative pediatric fluid management. Okay. So the learning objective of this class would be a few basics on fluid therapy and what is the difference between maintenance and replacement fluids, what is the difference between liberal and restricted fluid management, what is formula based and what is goal directed fluid therapy. Certain things may not be relevant for pediatric anesthesia, but for completion's sake, I have added. And should we give dextrose to a pediatric patient? Then few words about how to give blood transfusion, and we'll end with what is the role of colloids in pediatric practice. So initially, we'll start with the basics of fluid therapy. First thing that you should know is what is osmolarity or osmolality. It represents number of particles that are present in a solution. In our blood, we have certain particles which creates this osmolality, like your sugar, your sodium, your urea. Okay, these are the important things that maintains our osmolarity. If there's going to be any rise or drop in osmolarity, we are going to have problem with the tonicity of the fluid. The tonicity is nothing but osmolarity of that particular solution that you are going to give relative to plasma. Okay, so this term tonicity is very important whenever you give fluids. So this is the common method of calculating the osmolarity. 2 into sodium plus glucose by 18 and urea by 2.8. So if you do this calculation, why this 2 into sodium is usually associated with chloride. So you get approximately 270 to 290 milliosmol per liter. Okay, this is our plasma osmolarity. Any fluid that you give, which has got an osmolarity of say around 350, we call it as hyperosmolar. And any fluid which has got an osmolarity of say around 220, we call it as hypoosmolar. That is, we call it as hypotonic or hypertonic. If somebody says hypo or hypertonic, that means they are referring to our plasma level, plasma osmolarity, which depends on our plasma sodium, glucose, and urea. So the movement of fluid with osmolarity is the water will move from side of low osmolarity to side of high osmolarity. So this is very important. So if we are going to do a neurosurgical case, and if there's going to be intracerebral edema, cellular edema, and you want to remove the fluid from the cells. So what we do is we give a hypertonic solution, a solution which contains more sodium, like triple normal saline or mannitol. So what it does is it will remove, the water moves from side of low osmolarity to side of higher osmolarity. If we have a brain intracerebral edema, cellular edema, if you give hypertonic solution, the water will move from the brain and come to the plasma, thereby reducing the cellular edema. But most important thing as far as pediatric anesthesia is concerned is the worry about hypotonic solution. Certain fluids which are previously used like isolate P were all hypotonic. So if you give that hypotonic solution, what happens is the cell starts moving from the plasma into the cell and you get a intracerebral edema, more, and which leads to post-operative drowsiness, and few cases of death also has occurred. That is the reason why we don't use hypotonic solutions like isolate P in pediatrics. So these are the common osmolarity of common IV fluids. You see, this osmolarity is produced by sodium, glucose. So normal saline has got a sodium of 154 and chloride of 154. You add this, you get an osmolarity of 308. We said normal osmolarity is roughly around 295. So you take normal saline slightly hypertonic. It's only slightly hypertonic. If you take half normal saline, so 77 plus 77, you get 154. This is hypoosmolar or hypotonic. If you give this solution, the fluid will enter into the brain cells. If we use a triple normal saline is 3 times the normal saline. So 513, 154 into 3 is 513. So the total osmolarity will be 2 sodium, which will be roughly 1026. If you use this hyperosmotic solution, because it is hypertonic to the cerebral cells, it will just suck all the fluids. So it is useful for intracerebral edema. So the ringer lactate is the most common fluid that we use. If you see, the sodium is 130, chloride is 109, and it doesn't have any glucose. So you get an osmolarity of 273, which is almost close to your serum osmolarity. A new fluid which is available is a plasmolyte, which is almost close to our plasma, and it contains acetate, not lactate. So it is better in patients with an anaerobic metabolism or in shock. So, and pH is also very close to our normal pH, and it has got an osmolarity of 294. This is very important solution, 5% dextrose. It doesn't have sodium, doesn't have chloride, so no sodium, no potassium. Only thing that is available is glucose. So glucose is available as 5% is 50 milligram per ml. So this creates an osmolarity of 253. This you should remember, because all the solution which contain 5% dextrose, you will have to add. So 5% dextrose with ringer lactate. Ringer lactate osmolarity is 273. 5% dextrose is 253. If you add these two things, dextrose with ringer lactate, osmolarity will be 525. So this is hyperosmolar. Coming to our pediatric fluid, what we are previously using, isolate P. Sodium is very low. Chloride is very low. Sugar is high. Because of the sugar, you get a 340 osmolarity. What happens when you give this fluid into the vein? The dextrose gets metabolized into water and carbon dioxide by aerobic metabolism. What is left behind is only 26 millimoles of sodium and 21 millimoles of chloride. So roughly you will get a osmolarity of say around 50. So 50 osmolarity is very hypotonic. So that is the reason if you just keep on giving isolate P, the patient goes in for post-operative intracerebral edema, coding and death. So we don't use isolate P anymore in the intraoperative period. It may be used in the medical ward for maintenance, but never in the intraoperative period. So we use only ringer lactate, or you can use plasmolyte, or you can use a ringer lactate with some amount of dextrose added, not to this level. A reduced dextrose, 1% dextrose with ringer lactate or 2% dextrose with ringer lactate, which we will see as we move on. So the pink compartment is intravascular compartment. This is the interstitial compartment. This is intracellular compartment, and this is bone and other compartments. So in the intravascular compartment, you will put a venflon and you will give the IV fluids. Okay. So let us see what happens when we give a different type of IV fluids and what happens to the fluid because of the tonicity. So we talked about 3 hypotonic solution. Plain dextrose 253. When this dextrose gets metabolized, what is left behind is nothing, because there is no sodium there. So it becomes severely hypotonic once you give this fluid intravenously. So when we give this fluid here, what happens is the plasma osmolarity gets decreased. Because of the decrease in plasma osmolarity, there is a hypoosmolar solution or hypotonic solution. The fluid starts moving from intravascular compartment into interstitial, into intracellular compartment, producing cellular edema As anesthesiology, we are more worried about cerebral edema. Okay, so 5% dextrose, if you give continuously, the child will have intracerebral edema. Same thing with half normal saline. It is only 154. It will also move, but it may not move to the cellular level. At least it will move to the interstitial level. Isolate P, the fluid of what previously used to say as isolate pediatrics. Now we call it as isolate poison because it has got potassium. It will kill the patient. So this again, this 253 will just reduce. So what is left behind is only around 50. So if you give this fluid also, it is going to produce intracerebral edema. So any hypotonic fluid, if you give intravenously, the fluid will move into the cells. So if you use the isotonic fluids like normal saline, ringer lactate or plasmolite, the fluid stays here and some amount of fluid will move into the interstitial space. It may not move too much into the intracellular phase. So you might have a little amount of interstitial fluid, but it may not be clinically relevant. So this will be your ideal fluid of choice. There are few conditions where you may need to remove fluids from the cell, like your intracellular edema, etc., or your TURP in adults, where you may use 3% 3% normal saline. This is really super hypertonic. The soda bicarb that we use, it is also very hypertonic. 5% dextrose single lactate is also hypertonic. If the dextrose gets metabolized, still you get a 285. But when you give this whole fluid, it is hypertonic. Similarly, for dextrose with normal saline is also hypertonic. So if you give hypertonic solution, the fluid will start coming from the intracerebral place into the vascular compartment. When it comes to the vascular compartment, more fluid in the vascular compartment will produce osmotic diuresis. That is the most important thing when you use these hypertonic fluids. Now coming to why should we give perioperative fluids? Okay. Our aim is to maintain normal intravascular volume with normal electrolyte composition so that we will be able to maintain perfusion to the cell. So when you maintain perfusion to the cell, oxygen is delivered, sugar is delivered, electrolyte is maintained, waste products are removed, so the cell doesn't undergo destruction. So there is no injury to the cell because you are giving oxygen, you are giving sugar, you are giving adequate electrolytes. So the cell goes into aerobic metabolism and produces lots of ATP, which preserves the cellular metabolism. So if you are not able to give adequate oxygen, or if you are not able to maintain glycemia, what happens is cell undergoes cellular destruction. So this is called as anaerobic metabolism with cellular destruction, hypoxic cell injury. So our aim, one of our aim is to prevent this hypoxic injury. So if you see this side, cardiac output is nothing but stroke volume into heart rate. The stroke volume depends on preload, contractility, and afterload. The fluids that we give here is considered to be preload. If the heart is of norm, not a failing heart, the more fluid or more preload you give, more increase will be the stroke volume and more increase will be the cardiac output. So in this particular class, we are going to deal with only this maintaining the preload or changing or adjusting the preload to maintain the cardiac output. We adjust the preload by giving IV fluids. One more method of, okay. So coming to our today's class, intraoperative fluid therapy. Aim of our intraoperative fluid therapy is to provide preoperatively patient was fasting, or if you are going to do an emergency surgery, patient would have vomited or some other intestinal obstruction, some other blood loss, they would have lost fluid or blood. So our first aim is to replace the preoperative deficit. So this word is very important. We are going to replace. Okay? Intraoperatively, two things we are going to do. One is we are going to give fluid to maintain our basic metabolic requirement, that is called as maintenance fluid. So the most important words that you should understand is replacing the fluid and maintenance fluid. Third thing will be intraoperatively the patient will be losing fluids and blood, so we'll have to replace the current loss. So these are the three things that you should do perioperatively. The first thing that we should know is what is maintenance fluid therapy. Maintenance fluid therapy given for ongoing losses of water and electrolytes that occur via, this is a physiological process. This occurs at this particular time in every one of us. Whether we like it or not, we are going to lose this amount of water through urine, which you cannot control, sweat, the loss of fluid through the respiratory system, loss of fluid through the stools, and our basic cellular metabolism for ATP production. Everything requires some amount of fluid. And if you leave the patient on fasting without giving this maintenance fluid, they will have some amount of dehydration. So when we say maintenance, we are not giving for any losses. These are the physiological process that normally occurs in every individual, whether you are a patient or a normal person. So you will have to replace them. There are two types of losses, physiological losses. One is a sensible loss, another is an insensible loss. Okay. Next part is replacement fluid. Maintenance, we said it is loss occurring due to physiological process where we don't have, there is no pathology involved. Replacement is replacing fluid and water electrolytes for due to any illness, say diarrhea or intestinal obstruction or blood loss, or the patient is fasting for a very long time. So these are the things that is some kind of an illness. This is not physiological. This is what we have created, or because of the patient's illness, it has been created. And this has to be replaced. So this is called as replacement fluid. So this thing you have to understand. Maintenance is for physiological process. Replacement is for losses due to illness or your preoperative fasting. So first we will see the maintenance fluid therapy. We already said physiological process. So we have daily sensible water loss. Sensible means losses which you can perceive and losses that can be measured. Okay? You know that how much of urine you are able to pass. So you can measure them. So this is the daily sensible loss. Stool output, even though it is less, it is also a perceived and measurable fluid loss. Whereas insensible loss is a loss which cannot be perceived, that you cannot perceive that how much fluid is lost and you can never measure. So the water that is being lost through the respiratory system, you cannot measure or you cannot perceive. The water that is being lost through the evaporation, even if you are inside the room, that also cannot be measured or perceived. And every minute or every second, the cellular metabolism occurs. During cellular metabolism, we lose water. This also you cannot perceive or measure. So these are all called as insensible water loss. So both sensible water loss and insensible water loss, we take it into maintenance fluids. Okay? So what they have done is they have calculated that for this particular cellular metabolism, glucose plus oxygen produces carbon dioxide and water is produced and it is lost. At the end point will be they produce ATP and energy. So for burning each calorie, you need some amount of water. And this they have calculated as this Holiday-Seeger's formula, 4 ml per kg per hour for the first 10 kg, 2 ml per kg per hour for the second 10, 11 to 20 kg, and 1 ml per kg per hour for the remainder. So Holiday-Seeger formula is useful for calculating the maintenance fluid. So this has been done based on the amount of calories burnt for utilizing the or the water requirement for the amount of calorie burnt to produce this energy. When water is also used, the body also requires a maintenance electrolyte requirement, which is called as 323 law. Daily sodium requirement will be 3 milliequivalent per 100 kilocalorie per day. Potassium will be 2 milliequivalent per 100 kilocalorie per day. And chloride will be 3 millimeter per 100 kilocalorie per day. So what they have tried to do is they wanted to create a maintenance fluid which is similar to our body, our calculation of due to Howell-Desigas formula based on the burning of calories. Okay? So when they used both the amount of water requirement, that is 4:1 formula, and the electrolyte requirement 3:3 formula, they came with this particular solution, isolate P. Okay, problem is it has got 5% dextrose, but a very low sodium, 0.2% normal saline. 0.2% normal saline. So that is 5% dextrose, 0.2 normal saline, or this isolate P, which is 0.16% normal saline. So even though it will show a osmolarity of 273, 340, 253 in dextrose will be taken off. So what is left behind will be roughly around 50 or 55 will be the osmol for this particular fluid after you give intravenously. So when you give such a hypotonic solution, the fluid will move from the intravascular compartment into the cell, and we as anesthesiologists worried about intracerebral edema because the child will not recover from anesthesia, or post-operatively child will be drowsy, and sometimes because of the raised ICP there can be coning and child can die. So that is the reason why we have stopped using isolate P. So the isolate P is produced based on the body's maintenance requirement of water 4:1 and maintenance requirement of electrolyte 3:3. So this is what will happen when dextrose gets metabolized. What is left behind will be only hypotonic solution. So the fluid will enter into the cell because of hyponatremia and hypotonicity, and the brain is the most commonly involved organ. So when we say 4:1 formula, it is not same for all the patients. The maintenance requirements will vary. It depends upon the clinical status and the setting in which the patient is in the either in the theater or in the preoperative or in the postoperative rooms. There can be increased insensible water loss. Insensible is what you cannot measure and what you cannot perceive. What are the conditions normally seen is? One is prematurity. In premature children, if you see the skin thickness, the dermis is very thin. So there is an increased surface area. If you allow the baby to be exposed to a warmer condition or hotter condition, there is increased insensible water loss. So for these babies, you may have to increase your amount calculation for maintenance fluid. And any child on radiotherapy, they'll be losing heat, losing water, that is insensible loss. So you may have to increase your maintenance fluid. A child with burns will have increased insensible water loss and electrolyte loss. So you may have to increase the amount of water you are going to give as maintenance fluid. When the patient has got fever, there's going to be lots of water loss through the respiratory tract and the skin. So you'll have to increase your maintenance fluid. There are certain conditions where you may have to decrease the fluid, maintenance fluid to be given to the babies. Like a baby on ventilator with humidifier on. And the humidifier is on, water is going to be sent to the respiratory system. So the loss via the respiratory system is reduced. So you will have to reduce the maintenance fluid that you are going to give. Otherwise, baby will go for a more water logging. So this is very important. Similarly, there are few conditions where there is increased sensible water loss, where you may have to increase the amount of what maintenance fluid that you are going to give. Most important thing is your patients with colostomy or ileostomy or a baby with diarrhea, where because of the inability of the distal tubule to reabsorb the fluid that enter. Normally the fluid comes here, goes to the rectum and gets reabsorbed in the distal area. When you have a colostomy or ileostomy, the fluid is sent out. It is not getting absorbed. So these babies will require not 4:1 formula, but you will have to give more fluids for these babies. Similarly, in a patient with oliguria, the kidney is not able to pass urine. So again, there is a decreased sensible water loss. So you will have to decrease the amount of maintenance fluid. So maintenance fluid, normally we say 4:1 formula, but this has to be changed according to the patient's clinical conditions. Okay. If there is any doubt, just ask me. Is there any doubts? Feel free to ask me. Yeah.
Yes, sir. I will request the audience to ask their doubts in the chat box also. And
Okay.
in between, we can raise the hands and ask the doubts, sir.
Okay. Fine. If there's anything, you can just call me, right? Okay. Now we said the guidelines is 4:1 formula for maintenance fluid. What fluid we should give and how much we should give. So previously we were just giving 4:1 formula alone. Now we have got some guidelines. So in 2006, what happened was there was a sudden increase in post-operative death. And this they have done lots of study, and what they have found is the children who are dying or who are having post-operative problem, they were having hyponatremia, and they have found the cause of hyponatremia was they were giving either dextrose with 0.2% normal saline or our isolate P, which is dextrose with 0.16% normal saline. So this was the first part. 2006 was the time when they started understanding we are creating hydrogenic hyponatremia, which is dangerous to the baby's health. So this was first part. So in 2015, what they have come is the NICE guidelines gave a very clear uh, recommendation for giving maintenance fluid. We are talking about maintenance fluid. If a children or young people need IV fluids for routine maintenance, use isotonic crystalloid solution which contains 131 to 154. So what they have very clearly said is don't give isolate P or dextrose with 0.2% normal saline for maintenance. What are the fluids that contains this amount of sodium, 131 to 154? What we right now have is ringer lactate. Normal saline, we may not use it for maintenance. The new fluid, that is plasmolite. I'm talking about plasmolite plain. I'm not talking about plasmolite which contains dextrose. All these fluids contain sodium roughly between 131 to 154. So the NICE guidelines of 2015 very clearly says when you are going to give maintenance fluid, use only ringer lactate or plasmolite. But one more important thing they have added is all these babies are undergoing surgery and they are with stress. Whenever there is stress, there is antidiuretic hormone secreting that is called as non-osmotic area secretion. This leads to water absorption from the distal convoluted tubule. So they are very clearly said, restrict the fluid. You have a 4:1 formula. Don't give the total 4:1 formula. You calculate the maintenance fluid based on 4:1. Restrict the fluid to 50 to 80% of your calculated maintenance fluid. So if a 4:1 formula is going to be 100 ml, you just give between 650 to 80 ml. Don't give 100 ml because this ADH is going to act and this ADH is going to produce water retention. So there's no need to give full maintenance fluid. So this is 2000 update given by NICE. The second guidelines, which came roughly around 2018 by the American Academy of Pediatrics, it recommends pediatric patients requiring maintenance IV fluid should give isotonic fluid with appropriate potassium chloride and dextrose because they have increased development of hyponatremia. So what we are doing now is we are giving ringer lactate which contains isotonicity plus potassium, but we don't use dextrose ringer lactate because we have very clearly seen Dextrose ringer lactate is a hypertonic solution. So what we have started doing is we have started creating the fluid intraoperatively. We produce 1% or 2% dextrose with ringer lactate. Why it has not commercially come is that is because as multinational companies they want only profit, so they don't want to do any charity. Because for pediatric patients alone, if they create 1% or 2%, it may not sell in lots. So they are not preparing as a commercial solution, but we can prepare ringer lactate with dextrose. You can get a 1% or 2% dextrose. How to prepare, I'll tell you. Okay? So the evidence is very strong. So when the evidence quality is A, you should take this as a very good guideline. So for all maintenance fluid, you have to give isotonic solution with potassium and dextrose added if required. So the commonest fluid that we have is ringer lactate and plasmolite. The advantage of ringer lactate over isolate P, because previously when I was doing a post-graduation, we used to have this isolate P in the theater. We used to give, and our teachers, some of our teachers used to teach us isolate P is isolate pediatrics. Okay? Now we call it as isolate poison because it can kill the baby. Isolate potassium because it contains a lot of potassium. So advantages, ringer lactate is isotonic, so it produces less hyponatremia, less of intracerebral edema. Ringer lactate doesn't have more of dextrose like your isolate P, so the problems of hyperglycemia are not there. Ringer lactate stays intravascular because of the isotonicity. It improves the tissue oxygenation. Because the potassium content of ringer lactate is only 4 when compared to isolate P, which is around 20, it is less irritant and less painful. If you see any baby with ringer lactate with isolate P in the peripheral vessels or peripheral venflon, the child will be irritable. That is because the potassium is irritant. So never use isolate P. So we have talked about maintenance fluid. So we are going to use only isotonic fluids. We are going to use based on the Holiday-Seeger's formula 421. But the recommendation says you calculate the total amount, but give it only 50 to 80% for a regular patient. If you have certain patients like fever patient and all, you may have to increase. Or if you have a patient who has got a less requirement, you may have to decrease. So don't have a fixed amount. 421 formula is fixed, but the amount of fluid that you're going to give has to be based on the patient. Now we'll talk about replacement fluid. So maintenance fluid is given for a physiological loss. Replacement fluid is given for pathological loss like illness, like intestinal obstruction, or you have made the patient nil oral for 4 to 6 hours as saying as preoperative fasting period. So replacement is to correct water electrolyte deficit that occurred due to illness. So repletion of these fluids, that replacement of this fluid will get the patient from hypovolemia to normal volemia, and also the electrolyte status will come back to normal. So the replacement fluid perioperatively, what we give is we replace the losses that have already occurred. So if you're going to start the surgery by 9 o'clock, the losses that have occurred before 9 a.m. So that is the replacement fluid which has already occurred. This could be because of dehydration or any pathological conditions. In emergency cases, it will be like hypovolemia dehydration. In elective cases, the same losses that has occurred will be due to our fasting guidelines. So once we talk about dehydration, we should talk about how to assess dehydration. We always do a head to foot assessment of a baby to assess the dehydration status. So first thing that we see in the head is a fontanelle. We see for any sunken fontanelle. Below the fontanelle, we have the brain. C for the level of consciousness. Below that, you have the eye. C for the sunken eyes or tearless eyes. Below that is a nostril where you may have an increased ala nasi movement because of metabolic acidosis due to dehydration. Mouth will show you dry mouth, dry tongue. then your central wave artery will be of low volume. The child will have tachypnea, tachycardia, and if you come to the abdomen, you will have oliguria or reduced urine output. The skin turgor may be lost. The only issue is even malnutrition can have this. Then as you go to the periphery, there will be drop in blood pressure. There will be peripheral vasoconstriction. There can be reduced CRT. There can be cyanosis. And the most important clinical sign is weight loss. So that is the reason in pediatrics, if you see, they do a daily weighing of the baby, and any change is very important for assessment of hydration. So by assessing this, they have come to this particular type of grading system. So level of consciousness, here if you see, they are given it in haphazard way. So if you do it from head to foot, you will not miss anything. So whatever thing we are seeing, they are given level of consciousness, then they have just jumped to capillary refill. So instead of doing jumping like this, you just start from above, go down, you will not miss anything. And based on the clinical findings, they will say mild dehydration, moderate dehydration, severe dehydration. Okay? Why we should know that is you'll have to classify the severity. So if the dehydration is going to be mild, we call it as 5% dehydration in an infant or a 3% dehydration in a child. Okay? Moderate 10%, severe will be 15%. Why you should know this percentages? You calculate the amount of fluid the patient has already lost. It is very simple. Just put a zero next to your percentage. Something like your thiopentone. 5% thiopentone contains 50 milligram per ml. So similarly, if it is 5% dehydration, means it is 50 ml per kg is the amount of fluid loss. If they say 10% dehydration or moderate dehydration, the baby has lost 100 ml per kg. If your baby is 10 kg, then the baby has lost 1000 ml of fluid, or infant has lost 1000 ml of fluid. So we estimate the fluid loss, nothing but percentage of dehydration multiplied by 10 into patient's body weight. Okay, that will tell you the amount of fluid deficit. And the next important thing that you should understand is there are so many types of fluid loss. We can have a upper GA vomiting, post second part of duodenum vomiting. You can have an ileostomy patient. You can have diarrhea patient. We can have blood loss. All these things, if you see, there may be changes in the sodium loss. There can be changes in the potassium loss. There can be changes in the chloride loss. These all things can be corrected. But you see the last compartment, osmolality. All the fluid that are lost have got a say almost similar osmolality, roughly around 300, which is isotonic. So boldly you can replace all replacement fluid using isotonic fluid. The fluid that we have are normal saline, ringer lactate, and plasmolite plain. Okay? So this is the important thing that you should understand. So for any type of fluid loss can be replaced with isotonic. There is no place for hypotonic solutions anywhere here. So now we have a patient who has got 15% dehydration. That means severe dehydration. The patient BP has crashed. The pulse is very weak. So what happens is there is a dehydration, cellular dehydration, plus the amount of fluid in the vascular compartment is also reduced. So the condition where you say the amount of fluid in the vascular compartment is low is we call it as hypovolemia. Hypovolemia is decrease in volume of blood and plasma. This is not compatible with life because when the amount of fluid in the vascular compartment is reduced, the perfusion to your important organs like brain, coronaries, renal, everything decreases, and this will produce a major problem in the patient's life. Dehydration is you have a loss of fluid in the interstitial or intracellular place along with some kind of electrolyte imbalance. So you'll have to differentiate between dehydration and hypovolemia. Hypovolemia is life-threatening. So when we have a situation like this, correction of dehydration can be done slowly, but correction of hypovolemia should not be done slowly. So that is why we always resuscitate. Resuscitate is do urgently to fill this vascular compartment. Once you resuscitate, then you can slowly start correcting the dehydration, the intracellular dehydration or interstitial dehydration based on the sodium levels. So replacement means first is resuscitate. Normally in pediatric, we resuscitate when there is hypotension with rapid infusion of saline 20 ml per kg to be given within 10 minutes. In pediatric, we can give this bolus for 3 times. More than 3 times, if you give, the baby will go for hemodilution. Then we may have to think of giving blood transfusion. So that is a major difference between adult and pediatrics. In adult, you can just keep on giving more crystalloids or colloids, whereas in pediatric, if you give too much of crystalloids and colloids, they produce hemodilution. Our aim is to send oxygen to the peripheral tissues. If you hemodilute, even if you increase the blood pressure, the oxygen will not be delivered to the cell. Okay? So whenever you have a baby with hypotension and dehydration, first thing is we resuscitate intravascular compartment with boluses of normal saline 20 ml per kg. Once the BP comes to normal, then you check your electrolyte levels, then slowly correct the intracellular dehydration electrolytes. This has to be done within a matter of 1 hour. This can take even up to 24 hours. Okay? This will destroy the organ. This will not destroy the organ. So whenever you are called to see a intestinal obstruction patient in the preoperative ward, go assess the baby. If the baby is in shock, that is hypotensive, decompensated shock, resuscitate first. Then you do all other correction, slow correction of your electrolyte imbalance and all. Okay, we had a guidelines for maintenance where they said losses should be treated with isotonic solution. Similarly, the NICE has given a guidelines for replacement, resuscitation and replacement. So when the patient is in decompensated state, that means the BP is low. What they are given is early targeted fluid resuscitation to optimize tissue perfusion. Unless the tissue is properly perfused, the tissue will not get oxygen. So the tissue will go for hypoxic injury. So when you have a baby with hypotension, with dehydration, first thing is resuscitate. Resuscitate means give bolus fluids. So what type of fluid you will give? You will avoid glucose. So you will give glucose-free crystalloids with a sodium in the range of 131 to 154. So fluid that we have is normal saline or ringer lactate or plasmolite. Give it in the bolus of 20 ml per kg around 10 minutes time. If still the BP is not coming up, then you may have to repeat it once more. If it's still not coming, you can repeat for the third time. Only third time alone you are allowed. So by the time you will have to find out what could be the cause, whether the patient requires some other additions like vasopressors or inotropes, you will have to decide. Okay? So first part of replacement is resuscitation. Then you come to the second part. Second part is dehydration correction. This is based on what will be your sodium concentration. It could be isotonic or hypotonic or hypertonic dehydration. We don't have time to discuss each other thing, but the treatment differs. So that is the reason when we resuscitate, we always take the point of care testing like the plasma electrolyte, blood glucose, and RFT. Then when you get a results based on the serum osmolarity or serum sodium level, you decide on what type of fluid that you're going to give. But resuscitation should not wait for all these investigations. So once resuscitation has been done with ringer lactate or normal saline or plasmolite, then based on the serum sodium level, you give fluid which is isotonic. Isotonic, again, we have only two fluids, ringer lactate or plasmolite. What it tells you is these two fluids, either ringer lactate or plasmolite, is sufficient for pediatric patients for whom you are going to give both maintenance as well as replacement fluid. You don't have to give a separate maintenance and separate replacement fluid perioperatively. And in between, during surgery, you can take a blood sugar level or capillary sugar level. If the baby goes for hypoglycemia, then you can add dextrose, or we can prepare a solution that I'll tell you later how to prepare a solution where you can give less of dextrose. So I think now you'll be able to understand what is maintenance fluid and what is replacement fluid, and all fluid should be given. All this should be given as isotonic fluids. It should have sodium of 131 to 154. Okay, that is about the most important thing that I want to tell you: maintenance fluid and replacement fluid. Now we just see three types of fluid therapy. This may not be absolutely relevant for pediatric anesthesia, but for academic purpose, I have included this. Sorry. So, what is the problem of giving fluids? It is something like your balance. You will have to maintain the intravascular compartment, electrolyte, everything in a midline. If you give too much of fluid, what will happen is it is going to produce edema, interstitial edema. Whenever there is interstitial edema, there is going to be impaired oxygenation. Lung edema, interstitial edema, tissue interstitial edema. The patient can go for organ congestion. So you should avoid volume overload. When you avoid volume load, you should also avoid giving low fluids. Low fluid will produce hypotension. The shock will continue, organ will go for hypoperfusion. So you get cellular injury at various organs. So our aim should be to stay somewhere in the middle. So that is the most important part that you should understand whenever you give perioperative fluid management. So I said a liberal and restricted fluid management. So liberal means you give a lot of fluid. Restricted means you try to restrict the amount of fluid that. So in pediatric patient, perioperatively, we give what is called as formula based. Formula based is in perioperative period. So when you are starting the case at 9, so from 9 to 10 a.m., the body cells are working, the body is secreting urine, so the body is secreting water into the stools, the cellular metabolism is occurring, we are losing heat through our respiratory tract. So we are going to give a maintenance fluid for that particular hour, 9 to 10 a.m. We are going to give maintenance fluid based on 4 to 1 formula. Okay. Then for that 9 to 10 a.m., if the patient is an elective patient, so you're going to calculate the nil per oral deficit. Nil per oral deficit is, if you normally, even though we say 2 hours clear fluid, in a regular theater setup in our part, there is at least 4 hours of fasting. Okay. We may say 2 hours, but the amount that we give is too low. So we'll take this 4 hours of nil per oral state, where you calculate the hourly maintenance and you multiply into 4 hours and give 50% on the first hour, remaining 25% on the second hour, remaining 25% on the third hour. Okay, that is nil per oral deficit that has to be replaced. During surgery, there is going to be a lot of evaporation from the abdominal wall. The bowel, there is going to be a lot of water loss into the bowel wall or into the bowel lumen. This is what we call as tissue trauma loss, which is calculated as mild, moderate, severe, for which they say 5, 10, 20 ml per kg per hour. Then any ongoing blood loss more than your allowable maximal allowable blood loss, you will have to replace with blood. Okay, so this is what we do as a formula base. We calculate the amount and we give for first hour so much of maintenance, half of the NPO deficit, and tissue trauma loss. All these things we give. Whereas in a restricted fluid management, what they have said is, based on your NICE guidelines, they said don't go by this 4 to 1 formula. Reduce the maintenance to 50 to 70% of the calculated fluid for that particular hour. In replacement, they say you give nil per oral deficit, you give whatever the amount comes. The tissue trauma, what they said is don't give tissue trauma loss. This is what they were previously saying. They used to call it as third space loss. Loss is nothing but fluid lost into a place from where it cannot come back to the venous side. So it is not actively involved in fluid management. So those areas we call it as third space, something like a joint space or interstitial space. So what this is, when you are not able, when the fluid is not going to come back, or the fluid is not going to be excreted, don't give the fluid. So that is called as restricted. Restricted means they have restricted the maintenance fluid. In the replacement, they have restricted the tissue trauma loss. All the other things they said we can give. So these are the liberal and restricted fluid management. But they have done a study and they got in a pediatric anesthesia journal, done a study in pediatric, and they found what they found is if we are going to use a restricted fluid regimen, that means you are reduce the maintenance fluid and are not giving any fluid for tissue loss. Post-operatively, they needed more fluid resuscitation, and they have found they had more negative base excess. That means the patient had anaerobic metabolism because of inadequate oxygenation to the cell because of inadequate fluid. So what they have very clearly said in this particular journal or in this particular article, and it is being followed also, is restrictive fluid management may not be applicable to children. So in children, this restrictive fluid management where you don't give fluid for tissue trauma loss, this part has been taken off. So you give maintenance 50 to 70%, you replace the N2 and you give tissue trauma. So you use the liberal formula. Only thing is you restrict the maintenance. So the tissue trauma you don't cut. So that is the recommendation by the pediatric anesthesia. So this is about the study. Control group is complete maintenance and all the calculation based on the formula. Restrictive, they restricted the maintenance to 60 to 70%. They did not give any fluid for the tissue trauma loss. What they have found is the heart rates are higher, base excess was negative, so acidosis. So they concluded volume preload corresponding to interstitial space replacement was suitable for application to pediatric patients undergoing major abdominal surgery. So for pediatric patients coming for middle abdominal surgery, you give a restricted fluid, but you will have to give tissue trauma loss. So that is the latest guidelines for pediatric patient coming for surgery. One more thing that I wanted to talk is this is what we are going to give for pediatric patient, but this is the recent guidelines, goal directed. Here we set a goal. To achieve that goal of perfusion, you give a combination of fluid and inotropes. So give less fluids, you add inotropes. So you give lesser fluids, you give some vasopressors, you give some drug that acts on the contractility heart. We said the cardiac output as stroke volume into heart rate. So you improve the stroke volume by giving fluids. What formula based management says is you give fluid that will take care of the cardiac output. In goal directed, what they say is you give lesser fluids, you add vasopressors, and you add inotropes. So this is goal directed fluid therapy. It's a combination of fluid and inotropes to optimize the flow through the measurement of cardiac output and stroke volume. The problem is measurement of cardiac output and stroke volume are invasive and which cannot be done normally in all our patients, even in adult patient, because of the cost constraint and availability of the equipment. And because of the non-availability or difficulty in getting these equipments for pediatric age group, it is not done regularly in general pediatrics, but it can be done in cardiac centers where they have all these equipments. So now we come to how we monitor the intraoperative fluid status. We can monitor clinically or we can monitor by using tools. Clinical monitoring, mentation, preoperatively you can see, but you cannot see intraoperatively. Thirst you cannot see intraoperatively. Eyes may be shrunken. The dry mucosa you can see. What you can see clearly is tachycardia or bradycardia, hypotension or normotension, pulse volume. Breathing we can also see. Skin turgor will be there. Temperature will be there. Capillary refill time you can see. Okay, these are the clinical monitoring that you can see. But this clinical monitoring will not tell you whether the patient is hypovolemic or not. So we go in for some monitors. So previously what we used to say is when you put a CVP and the CVP goes down, we used to say the patient is hypovolemic. But that has been proved wrong because CVP measures only the pressure, it doesn't measure the volume. Plus it is invasive. It is not an aid to assess the fluid responsiveness or the fluid level of the patient. Then they said we can go in for pulmonary capillary bed pressure. Again, it's only a pressure. It will not give you the idea about the fluid responsiveness. Then they said we can use an echocardiogram and find out the stroke volume. Yes, it is a nice method of doing it non-invasive. But what's the problem is you cannot keep a echocardiogram probe on the board on the chest and see beat to beat changes to find out the volume status. So these three things will not be of much use in finding out about the volume status. What is found to be best is stroke volume or pressure volume variation. This is an invasive method. It requires a high monitors of high cost. It tells you the dynamic status. That means it tells you what is the hemodynamic status, what is the volume status. So it is good for assessing the fluid responsiveness. Esophageal Doppler, which measures the flow of blood in the aorta. Yes, this can be used, but cannot be used regularly. What we normally see in the fast method of ultrasonic guidelines, where we see the inferior vena cava diameter and the collapsibility, but you cannot do it intraoperatively. Passive electrolytes test and the changes they see in cardiac output, again, it may be good, but it is not useful intraoperatively. So intraoperatively, only thing that is available may be at this time the stroke volume variation. But because of the cost, because of non-availability for the pediatric size, it is not very well used. So just a few words for academic sake, what is the stroke volume variation? So during normal inspiration, we have a negative intrapleural pressure. When you want to measure the stroke volume variation, there are certain basic conditions. One basic condition is patient should be given muscle relaxant and mechanically ventilated. So when you mechanically ventilate the patient, so we have a fixed tidal volume. So the change in the intrapleural pressure becomes fixed. So when the intrapleural pressure increases or decreases, the venous return will be same for every breath. So the patient should be mechanically ventilated. So in a mechanically ventilated patient, when the patient goes in for inspiration or when the bellow pushes or gives the inspiration, the intrapleural pressure goes positive. This leads to reduction in venous return from the abdomen. This leads to reduction in the right ventricular preload. So this will also leads to increase in right ventricular afterload. Because in pediatric, both the ventricles are dependent on each other for the output. That is called as biventricular dependence. Whenever there is a decrease in right ventricular preload, there is also a decrease in left ventricular output. That will be shown as a systolic pressure. Okay, so this is what will happen during inspiration. If you see the stroke volume, there is a positive and there is a reduction during inspiration because there is a change in the intrapleural pressure. There is a rise in pressure. During expiration, there is a drop in pressure. If you see the peaks, rise in pressure and drop in pressure, and they find out the difference between the maximum and the minimum pressure, stroke volume variation. So stroke volume variation is nothing but the variation of stroke volume to different part of the respiration. This cannot be done on a spontaneously breathing patient, for which we need an ideal condition where you give a relaxant and intubate the patient. So when you do this, you get a value. Okay, this is stroke volume variation. So the difference between the peak pressure at inspiration and the peak pressure at the expiration, this difference, okay, is shown as a number, stroke volume variation, which is a number. Okay? Just think of a situation where the heart doesn't have adequate fluid. What it will do is it will try to squeeze more. When the blood is less in the heart, it tries to squeeze more. When it squeezes more, this peak pressure goes up during inspiration. During expiration, it comes down. That tells you when this number goes high. If it goes more than 15, if it reaches 20, that means the heart is trying to squeeze more. When the heart is trying to squeeze more, it tells you indirectly the heart doesn't have volume. So what we do is when the stroke volume variation is more, this stroke volume variation is more than 13, they call it as volume responsive. You give fluids. If you give fluid, see the cardiac output and stroke volume. If the stroke volume improves and this stroke volume which was previously 20, if it comes to 10 means and the stroke volume increases, it tells you this patient is only a patient requires only fluid to and not inotrops. Suppose the stroke volume variation is only 10, the cardiac output is low. So that means the patient doesn't need fluid because the stroke volume is below 13, but the cardiac output is low, and this patient may require either a pressor or an inotrop. So that is the advantage of this flow track system. Okay, this I am telling you because we may not be using it in pediatric fluid management, but in intensive care fluid management in adults, this system is very important. In the exam, they will ask you about stroke volume variation. Stroke volume variation is nothing but change in stroke volume to various parts of the phases of the respiration. So when the patient has got a hypovolemia, there is less of water in the ventricle, and because of the changes in the pleural pressure, the heart tries to squeeze more. This stroke volume variation increases. If it goes above 13, that tells you the patient requires fluid. If it is below 13, it tells you the patient doesn't require fluid. Maybe the patient may require pressor or inotrops. Okay. So why we are not using in pediatric is we don't have this type of a monitor available for pediatric patient. Plus, this is expensive and is invasive, and we cannot do for a routine perioperative management. So this is only for academic purpose. So what we do normally in pediatrics is what we are going to talk now, and this is what we follow, and you can also follow the same. This is formula-based fluid management with some amount of restriction as given by the NICE guidelines. So pre-operative, when somebody says fluid management, you divide them into 3 periods. You divide them into pre-operative period, intraoperative period, and post-operative period. So you have 2 types of surgeries. One is an elective surgery and another is an emergency surgery. In elective surgery, you intentionally make the patient nil oral. So when you make the patient nil oral for 4 hours, they lose 4 hours of maintenance fluid. So that creates a deficit. That is elective patient deficit that has to be replaced for elective patients. In case of an emergency patient where the patient vomits or the patient loses blood, the patient goes in for different amount of dehydration and hypovolemia. If the patient has got a low BP, first thing you replace is resuscitate. You get the patient to blood pressure to normal by giving boluses of normal saline, 20 ml per kg, given at 10 minutes interval. Once the BP comes up, then you start replacing the existing deficit. You need not have to replace in the pre-operative period itself. It depends upon when the surgeon wants to take the patient for surgery. You can take 4 hours, 8 hours, sometimes it may even take 24 hours. If the surgeon wants to take it in the middle, you can allow him to start maybe after 5 hours or 6 hours and continue to give this replacement fluid every hour during intraoperative period as well as in the postoperative period. So this is about the preoperative period. It is based on the fluid deficit. Now we come to the intraoperative part of the fluid management. Here you will have to give the maintenance for that particular hour. So if the surgery starts at 9 o'clock, so 9 to 10, you give a maintenance fluid based on Holiday-Seeger's formula 4 to 1, which the NICE guideline says you calculate the total dose, give only 50 to 80% depending upon the patient's condition, and you use only isotonic fluid containing sodium of 131 to 151. That will be a ringer lactate or a plasmolite. The second part that you're going to give intraoperative for that particular hour is replacement. If it is elective patient, you calculate the NPO duration. So based on the number of hours, maintenance fluid into number of hours, 50% in the first hour, 25% in the second hour, and another 25% in the third hour. If it is an emergency, you calculate that amount of dehydration. So calculate how much the patient does lost fluid, and if the patient requires resuscitation, give that resuscitation. Then remaining amount you give for 4 to 6 hours or whatever hours that is required. The second part of the replacement that you should give is for tissue trauma loss, whether the patient is coming for a minor surgery, moderate surgery, or a severe surgery. This is based on how much of the size of your scar and how much of exposure of the bowel or your cavity is exposed. Third part is blood loss, that is going to be dependent on your calculation of maximal allowable blood loss. So this is about intraoperative fluid management. Okay. So maintenance for that particular hour, we have said 4 to 1 formula. There is no place for hypotonic fluid. So you calculate based on your 4 to 1 formula, give a fluid which contains 131 to 154, that is ringer lactate or plasmolite, restrict to 50 to 80% of your routine maintenance. Replacement fluid, if it is nil per oral for 4 hours, maintenance into number of hours. So again, you can give restrict that fluid also and give it half in the first hour, remaining in the next 2 hours. Then we said tissue trauma loss. It depends on the size of the patient surgical incision and the exposure of the contents. So based on these two factors, they are said a minimal incision or moderate incision or severe incision. They said you can add 3 to 5 cc per kg per hour, 5 to 10 or 10 or 20 maximum for a larger or a major surgery will be 20 cc per kg per hour for tissue trauma loss. And again, once again, it has to be given as isotonic fluid alone. So replacement, we always said isotonic crystalloids, they should have 131 to 151, LR or plasmolite. Why I am repeating these slides are, I just want you to get into your mind that you give only isotonic fluid for both maintenance as well as for replacement. So now we'll take an example. We'll take a child who's 10 kgs of weight coming for a moderate surgery. So the amount of fluid that we will give will be, and for that particular hour will be maintenance for 10 kg will be 40 ml. So I am going to give one, I am going to restrict it to 80% or 75%. So that will be 30 ml per hour. My patient was on nil oral for 4 hours. So if we calculate for 4 hours, it will become 160 ml. Half of it will be 80 ml, but I am restricting it. So I'll be giving only 60 ml will be the nil per oral for the first hour. 30 ml will be for the second hour, another 30 ml will be for the third hour. And I said it's a moderate surgery. For moderate surgery, I have taken a tissue trauma loss of 10 ml per hour. So for 10 ml per hour, I have taken 10 into 10, it is 100 ml. If I add all those things, my patient requires 190 ml, 220 ml is formula based. I have restricted based on the NICE guidelines. So my patient requires for a surgery 190 ml for the first hour. If I'm going to have a blood loss, I'm going to replace blood loss with blood. Okay. So it is going to be 190 ml for a 10 kg child for the first hour. That is about how we go for intraoperative period. Now we come to the next important period is a post-operative period. Many of us, what we do is when we extubate the patient, we send the patient to the post-op ward or post-op recovery. From there, the patient is sent to the post-op ward. And many of us don't write the post-operative fluid management or fluid orders. So post-operative fluid orders are very important because if you don't give a proper fluid at a proper dose, that will increase the morbidity or sometimes it can even produce mortality. So post-operative also is very important. Most important thing in post-operative period is the stress, and the ADH will be at the peak in the post-operative period. Whenever there is ADH, what it does is it prevents the water from going out. So there is a retention of water. So if you give more fluid, you are going to have more fluid in the body, which will have it will produce interstitial edema. Whenever there is interstitial edema, it acts as a barrier for oxygen to move from the capillaries to the cells. So we don't want that to happen in the post-operative period. So we'll have to be very careful in giving fluid in the post-operative period. So what fluid and how much will you give? So for that particular hour, we give the maintenance fluid. Maintenance fluid, again, it's a isotonic fluid. You give 60 to 70%. So 70% if you take, you'll be safe. You'll not be undergiving or overgiving. So take 70% as a calculated maintenance fluid for that particular hour. Plus, you just add what comes out of the patient. So if the patient is having an NG tube, whatever amount of fluid that comes out through the NG tube, you can replace with an isotonic fluid. If the patient has got a wound drain, whatever the amount the wound fluid that comes in the wound drain, you may have to replace, and you may have to replace the urine output. So this is the amount of fluid that you are going to give in the postoperative fluid. The most important thing that you should understand is the release of antidiuretic hormone that is called as non-osmotic ADH secretion, which will lead to water absorption. So you will have to restrict your fluid. So you calculate the maintenance fluid, restrict to 70%. You just give that extra fluid only for nasogastric tube drain, wound drain, or urine output. So this is what we give for the postoperative fluid. Again, same, we are emphasizing again and again, no place for any hypotonic fluids. Many places I have seen they will give half normal saline. That is hypotonic. It cannot be given continuously because half normal saline will produce intracerebral edema. So you give only isotonic fluid in the postoperative period. Okay, that is about fluid management. So fluid management means preoperative period, intraoperative period, postoperative period. Preoperative period, it is always deficit. It could be elective or emergency. You replace them based on the Holiday-Seeger formula or based on the amount of dehydration you calculated and give isotonic fluids. Intraoperatively, always give at that particular hour a maintenance fluid and do the calculation based on Holiday-Seeger formula and restrict to 70%. Then you give the loss that occurs in the tissue trauma, and then you can replace the loss that occurred either due to NPO and elective surgery or the continuation of the replacement in the emergency surgery. Then you may have to give blood loss to be replaced in the blood. In the post-operative period, you should always think of ADH secretion. So you restrict the fluid, just give the maintenance fluid alone, plus whatever that is lost for that particular hour, NG tube aspiration, urine output or drainage. Okay, that is how we give fluid. The next important issue in perioperative fluid management pediatrics is, should we give glucose or not? Previously, when I was a postgraduate, for all patients, we used to give dextrose because we were taught children will become hypoglycemic and patient will have fits and patient will have neurological problem. So we always used to give 5%, that isolate P business, 5% dextrose. We gave because we thought glucose was required for all the patients. Okay? But in 2008, there is a very good study which was presented in the Euroanesthesia, where Isabel Murat was one of the very good person who done a research on fluid management and who gave this thing. glucose infusion at the rate of 120 to 250 milligram per kg per hour, because our idea of giving glucose should be it should neither produce hypoglycemia nor it should produce hyperglycemia. So if you give this amount, the patient will not go for hypoglycemia. The patient will be able to maintain acceptable blood glucose. What happens when the patient goes for hypoglycemia is it produces gluconeogenesis like lipid mobilization. So we want to prevent even this. We don't want ketone bodies to come out. So what he said is for any pediatric patient, we have a glucose infusion rate of around 200 milligram per kg per hour, and that is sufficient to prevent hypoglycemia. That will also prevent hyperglycemia. So now we will go back to our original case where we gave fluid for a 10 kg patient, where we calculated 220 ml as the fluid requirement for the first hour. Okay. So now we will take two fluids. One is a 5% dextrose normal saline or 5% dextrose ringer lactate or isolate P. Okay, all contains 5% dextrose. Okay. So 5% dextrose means 50 milligram per ml. We are supposed to give 220 ml for that particular hour. So 220 ml of fluid with 50 milligram per ml of dextrose will give totally 11 grams or 11,000 milligrams of dextrose you will be given to the patient. But the patient's requirement is only 120 to 250. So you take it as 200. So 200 milligram is the requirement to prevent ketone bodies from production or prevent the patient from going for hypoglycemia. So 200 into 10 kg, you require only 200 milligram of dextrose. Whereas if you use a fluid like 5% dextrose normal saline, you are giving how much? Almost 6 times the glucose requirement. So the patient's blood will be thick with sugar. Okay, patient will be a sweet child. So we don't want that sweet child because that sweet child will give you lots of problems. We'll discuss later. What we give is you can give a 1% dextrose with ringer lactate. 1% dextrose contains 10 milligram per ml. So if we give this particular fluid 220 ml, we are going to give only 2,200 milligram, which is roughly near what is the dextrose requirement for a 10 kg child. Okay, I think you understand the difference between the dextrose that you give. Whether you want to give or not, you need not target to give dextrose. You can check the capillary level and you can give dextrose. Or if you are worried, then you can prepare a 1% dextrose solution with ringer lactate. You can give it boldly, whatever amount you want to give. Neither become hypoglycemic nor the baby will become hyperglycemic. Why we are worried about this hyperglycemia business is hyperglycemia produces increase in osmolarity of the fluid or blood. So what will happen? The fluid from the intracellular compartment will come to the intravascular compartment. It will produce osmotic diuresis, dehydration, and electrolyte abnormality. This is what happens when you give mannitol. Mannitol has got so much of sugar. Why we give mannitol? Because you want to produce osmotic diuresis. So if you give a 5% dextrose normal saline, that is also going to produce the osmotic diuresis. So we don't want to give any 5% dextrose containing solutions intraoperatively or perioperatively. But this is not the only issue we are worried about. First problem will be if you see the reaction, glucose plus oxygen becomes carbon dioxide, water, energy, and ATP. Okay. Now we have a patient who has got whom we are given 11,000 milligram of dextrose. So blood is full of dextrose. Okay. So suddenly the patient goes for desaturation due to any cause, patient cause or machine cause or whatever cause. They go for hypoxia. When the patient goes in for hypoxia desaturation, this oxygen is not available. So glucose, instead of becoming carbon dioxide and water, it will become what? It will go for anaerobic metabolism and end up in production of lactate and intracellular acidosis. Both will result in brain cell death. Okay, this is irreversible brain cell death. So that is the reason why we don't give 5% dextrose containing solution in pediatric patients. Okay, we don't want to give too much of sugar, more than what is required, and suppose we have a hypoxic episode, the child will have irreversible brain damage. Okay, that is about fluid management. All your queries will clarify at the end. We'll finish up blood management. I'm not going to go into the depth. I'm just going to tell you only a few basics about blood transfusion in pediatrics. So why we give blood transfusion is, if you see the oxygen flux is nothing but the amount of oxygen delivered to the cell. It depends upon the cardiac output. The cardiac output depends on stroke volume and heart rate, which you are taken care of by giving fluids. We have another compartment, that is hemoglobin saturation, how much of hemoglobin available. Okay, both these things combine to give a oxygen flux of 1000 ml per minute. If the cardiac output is going to be low, the amount of oxygen that is going to be cell is be low. If you are able to maintain cardiac output by giving fluids, inotropes, etc., if the patient is anemic due to any cause, again the oxygen delivery is going to be low. Our idea is we'll have to maintain the adequate oxygen flux. Okay? For that, we need to give blood transfusion. For giving blood transfusion, there are certain basic things you have to do preoperatively. For every patient whom you suspect they need blood transfusion, first thing is you calculate the estimated blood volume of the patient. Then you see the patient's investigation, see the preoperative hematocrit level, and see whether the patient has got any coexisting illness like severe respiratory disorder, cyanotic heart disease, or sepsis, where you have to maintain a higher hematocrit. Okay? So now we'll go to each step. The first thing that you do is you calculate the estimated blood volume depending upon the age of your patient. If it is preterm, means it is 95 to 100 ml. If it is a term neonate, it is 90 ml. If it is an infant, it is 80 ml per kg. If it is an adult, it is between 65 to 75 depending upon the sex of the patient. So we are more worried about this group, okay? Infant and neonates. So first thing you do is, if the baby is 10 kg, its estimated blood volume will be 800 ml. If the neonate is 3 kg, full term neonate, estimated blood volume will be 270 ml. If the preterm baby, if it is 1.5 kg, estimated blood volume will be 100 into 1.5, it will be roughly around 150 ml will be the estimated blood volume. Roughly speaking, if you have a blood loss of more than 10% of the estimated blood volume, you will have to transfuse blood. That is just a rough idea of how to give blood transfusion, but you are not, as an anesthesia postgraduate, don't do that. You know how to calculate the blood volume. Now learn how to calculate the loss, allowable loss, and how to give blood transfusion. This slide is very important. So what you do is, don't try to mug, just take the photograph, keep it in your cell phone. Whenever you do a pediatric patient, just refer it. There is no need to keep it in your memory and do it. Okay, you can keep it as a reference. So the hematocrit, we have three things. One is what is normal for that particular age group. What is ideal? Ideal is nothing but almost the higher end of normal. Okay, if it is a newborn, ideal will be 54. If it is 3 months, ideal will be 34. Ideal means I'll be very happy if I have a hematocrit of this level in my patient. Normal for that age group will be between 40 and 45, 30 or 42, or 35 or 43. The lowest acceptable, this is the level till which I will allow the blood to be lost. If it goes below 25, if it goes to 23, I will say no, stop, I'll have to give blood transfusion. In adults, you can keep giving crystalloids or colloids, whereas in pediatric, we'll have to give blood transfusion a bit early. because we are worried about oxygen transfer to the cells. So these three things you should understand. What is a normal hematocrit value for each age group? What will be the ideal so that I'll be comfortable in the post-operative period after transfusion? What is the lowest acceptable? Why we need these three things is ideal hematocrit is a level which we use to calculate the volume to be transfused. How much of RBCs that you are going to give. Because when you have this patient at a normal level of say around 40 hematocrit, the patient loses blood. Okay, when the patient loses blood, I need to give blood. So I need not have to give blood from 30 to 32 or 33. I would like to give up some amount of blood so that the hematocrit reaches 36. I don't want again give blood transfusion in the post-operative period. So I'd like to have my baby in the ideal hematocrit level. So I like to give a blood amount of blood that will take my baby who is losing blood to an ideal level. So this ideal hematocrit is used for calculating the volume of blood to be transfused. This lowest acceptable is, this is my normal amount. This is the lowest hematocrit that is acceptable to me. If it reaches this level, I will start giving blood transfusion. So I think you are able to understand the difference. Ideal is how much I'd like to give transfusion. The lowest acceptable is how much I'll allow the blood to be lost. So we have two calculation, maximal allowable blood loss. So I said this is the lowest allowable hematocrit that I'll allow. So the formula is hematocrit of the patient, preoperative hematocrit of the patient. So maybe around say 30 or 35, and this is the lowest acceptable level by patient's preoperative hematocrit into estimated blood volume will give you how much is the maximal allowable blood loss that I can allow intraoperatively. Now, intraoperatively, patient has lost blood. Now I want to give blood for this patient, but I don't want it to reach 30 alone. So I would like to ideally have my post-transfusion blood hematocrit to 36. So I'll have to reach the ideal hematocrit. So this is calculated by estimated blood volume into this is what I want to reach, and this is the hematocrit after the blood loss. Okay, here there may be some fallacies because if you are not given adequate fluids, the patient might be having mild hemoconcentration. If you are given too much of crystalloids, the patient can have hemodilution also. Okay, but we take in the post-operative period or intraoperatively if it's going to be long surgery, and you take the actual hematocrit that is available at that particular time, and this is the ideal level I would like to go, and this is the hematocrit of the blood product that I am going to use. Normally, the pack cell that we get is around 70 will be the hematocrit of the pack cells that we normally get. That depends upon the institution. It may be between 60 to 70 will be the hematocrit of the blood that is present in the pack cells. So now we'll take one more case. 1 year child weighing 10 kg. So I've been asked to calculate the estimated blood volume. So 1 year child, based on the calculation, estimated blood volume is 10 into 75 ml. So my estimated blood volume is 750 ml. So the actual hematocrit of the patient is 20. Ideally, I want for that particular age group will be 35. So how much of blood I'm going to give is 750 into 35 is the ideal I want to reach. Right now, hematocrit is 20. So 35 minus 20 will be 15 by hematocrit of the blood product. It could be between 60 and 70. In ICH, they say it is 70. So the amount of pack cell that you're going to transfuse for this patient 1 year weighing 10 kg will be 750 into 35 minus 20. That is ideal minus actual, which is 15, by 70, which roughly comes to 160 ml of packed recipient cells has to be transfused for this particular patient. Okay. Another simple method is you can say packed cell will be 10 to 20 ml, platelet will be 10 to 20 ml, FF will be 10 to 12 to 15 ml. So you can, for simplification, if somebody asks you how much of platelets you want to give or how much of FF you want to give, you can say 15 ml per kg will be the suggested dose. This is for a rough scale, okay? But you will have to calculate everything. So that is about blood transfusion. Finally, we come to the role of colloids. In pediatric, the colloids are used less when compared to adults because of main thing is cost, and there are few other reasons also. There are many studies which says in trauma in pediatrics there is no evidence to suggest that resuscitation with colloids reduce the risk of death compared to resuscitation with crystalloids in patients with trauma or burns or those who underwent surgery. This was a multi-center RCT. Okay, they are given this, so the colloids doesn't have much value in pediatrics. These are the common colloids we have: gel-based, starch-based, dextran-based, or albumin-based. What is right now available is hydroxyethyl starch, H, or what we call as olivine, 6%. They have certain problems like prolonged APTT because of the reduction in factor VIII level by 50%. They can, all these colloids can have anaphylactic reactions. Most important problem with hydroxyethyl starch is they can produce acute renal failure. Okay, this you should know. Regarding gelatins, succenated gelatins, they have a very low molecular weight. Because of very low molecular weight, they just go out of the capillaries into the interstitium. So they don't stay intravascularly. Why we are giving colloids? We want the fluid to stay intravascularly for a longer time. We want the blood pressure to be maintained because there is no RBCs here which will carry oxygen in that. This is only to maintain the perfusion of the peripheries. So when you have a fluid which is not going to stay for a longer time, it is not of much use. So you may have to give a repeated infusion. Again, they have the same problem of bleeding tendency and allergies. And these are the reasons why we are not using too much of colloids in pediatrics, even though we may have used certain amount of colloids. So to recap the whole class, there are two things. One is a maintenance fluid. It is given for maintenance of cellular, for burning the calories. That is both insensible and sensible loss. So the routine maintenance, even though based on the 4-to-1 formula and the 3-to-3 electrolyte formula, you get a hypotonic solution. Never give hypotonic solution. Guidelines very clearly says use only isotonic solution containing sodium in the range of 131 to 154. What we have is ringer lactate, plasmolite, and normal saline. Normal saline, we don't use it for maintenance. So what we have is ringer lactate or plasmolite without dextrose. And you calculate it based on the Holiday-Seeger formula. And based on the guidelines, you restrict to 70%. Whatever your calculation, you restrict to 70%. Replacement has got two parts. One is resuscitation, another is replacement. When the patient's BP is down, when the patient is hypolimic, it is an emergency situation which requires resuscitation. So early targeted fluid resuscitation, our idea is to optimize tissue perfusion so the cells will get oxygenated. How do you use it is glucose-free crystalloids, because when the patient is in shock, the patient will be hypoxic. We know if you give glucose, hypoxia with dextrose will produce brain damage. So glucose-free crystalloids with 131 to 154 sodium, we give 3 bolus, and these are the fluids that are used. Once the resuscitation is over, you replace with the isotonic fluid with a ringer lactate or plasmolite. So these two fluids can be used safely for both pre, intra, and post-operative periods. So I conclude in saying fluid is a drug. So you should treat as a drug. It should not be treated as bottle 1, bottle 2, bottle 3. Calculate the maintenance fluid based on how it is figure and give 70% of the calculation for maintenance. Use only isotonic for both maintenance and replacement. Post-operative period, because of PDH, again give only 70% maintenance plus whatever that is lost per that particular hour, like urine output, NG tube or drain. Avoid again hypotonic fluid even for the post-operative fluid. Dextrose is necessary, but requirement is only 200 milligram per kg per hour. So too much of dextrose will kill the brain. So avoid dextrose containing fluid. If there is a requirement, you can create a dextrose containing fluid and you can give it to the patient. Thank you. Now the session is open for any clarifications. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Dear participants, now the session is open for any questions. So far, I haven't received any question in our chat. Participants can unmute yourself.
Hello.
Participants can unmute yourself.
You just identify yourself and just ask me.
I've unmuted all.
Dr. Krishnan here from Delhi. I just needed to know if there's a lot of talk these days about the fluid boluses causing damage to the glycocalyx. Is this an issue in pediatric as well, like they are talking about adult patients and so on?
Yes, hyperolemia definitely produces damage to glycocalyx and produces interstitial edema. The resuscitation part, which I said, is only during resuscitation. When the BP is down, the organ perfusion is low. This is a life-saving situation where even if you give that bolus, it is not going to pressurize the glycocalyx. One of the theories they say is the glycocalyx is getting pressurized. There is a leak between the glycocalyx and that is producing the problems. But during resuscitation, that 20 ml bolus may not create that problem. So we want a live patient. Unless you resuscitate a patient, you will not have a live patient. Because if you keep the patient in hypotension for a longer time, they will go for multi-organ disorders, multi-organ failure because of hypoxic injuries. The glycoproteins, the same theory acts even in pediatric also.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir. It was very, very enlightening, interesting session. And I think all our participants would have got a very good take-home message and practice concepts. So I request the participants to apply all these concepts in your day-to-day practice and give your valuable feedbacks and how this lecture affected your day-to-day practice and what are the positive benefits you gained by participating in this program. I thank on behalf of Raisa and all our participants, Professor Krishnan, who has given us his valuable time and enlightening session on fluid therapy. I request him to continue with the same session for a second session with the electrolytes and acid-base management also for the benefit of our postgraduate students, sir.
Sure, the acid-base balance is continuing. I think on Saturdays it will be continuing. Once I finish that, then I'll go in for electrolytes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
With the direction of Professor Krishnan and all the other participants, I'll sign off this meeting, sir. Thank you.
Thank you so much.